All right, another civics question worth asking. And today, this is episode 20, and I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to answer the question, why do primaries matter so much? And as a government and civics teacher, I spend a lot of time reminding the kids that civics is not just about, passing the Constitution test to graduate. And ultimately, it comes down to understanding how power and rights and responsibilities and the rules of self-government are all important. So, why do primaries matter so much? When most people think about elections, they often think about what happens in November with the general election. You got Democrat versus Republican, one candidate versus another, winner takes the office. But in many places, some of the most important decisions happen before the general election ever arrives. And that's what primaries are for. A primary election helps decide which candidate will represent a political party in the general election in November. So in other words, primaries help answer this question. Who gets to be one of the final choices? So that matters because voters in November can usually only choose from the candidates who make it through the nomination process. If you wait until the general election to start paying attention, many important choices may have already been made. And so primaries matter because they help construct or shape the ballot. They decide whether voters get a moderate candidate, a more ideological candidate, an experienced candidate, a newcomer, a local candidate, or a candidate that's backed by party leadership. And the primaries can determine the direction of a political party. They can decide what issues actually get emphasized. And they can reward candidates who appeal to highly engaged voters. And in some districts, primaries can matter even more than the general election. And that's especially true in areas that are just dominated by one party. Now, if you have a district that is strongly Republican or strongly Democratic, the winner of that party's primary may be heavily favored when November comes around. And in those places, the real contest may happen months before the general election. And that means a small number of primary voters can have a major influence on who actually holds office. And this is one of the reasons primaries can contribute to political polarization. Primary voters are often more politically active, more ideological, and more motivated than just the broader general public. So candidates may feel pressure to appeal to the voters most likely to show up at the primary, even if those voters do not represent the full range of people within their district. Now, that doesn't mean primary voters are bad citizens. It's quite the opposite because they are out there participating. But it does mean that when people skip primaries, they give more influence to the smaller group that happens to show up. Now, primaries also matter because the rules are different from state to state. Some states have open primaries, and this is where voters may choose which party's primary to participate in. Some may have closed primaries, and this is where voters must be registered with a party to vote in that party's primary. In Illinois, where I happen to live, we have open primaries, and you just pick the party's ballot whenever you go in. There are some states that have variations that allow unaffiliated voters to participate or to use systems where the top candidates, they will advance regardless of the party they're in. Now, those rules affect who has a voice in choosing the nominees. They also shape the kind of candidates who are likely to win. There are reasonable arguments about different primary systems out there. Closed primaries can protect a party's ability to choose its own nominees. Open primaries can give voters more flexibility and may include people who do not strongly identify with just one party. Top two or top four systems can actually change the relationship between parties and candidates and voters. And so whatever system a state happens to use, there's a basic point that does remain, and that is primaries are not minor elections. They are part of how power is organized, and they help decide who gets access to the general election ballot. They also influence what choices voters have later. They also shape the direction of government long before most people are paying attention. This is why citizens need to take primaries seriously, because a republic does not run only on high-profile national elections. It also runs on state legislative races, county races, judicial races in some states. Then you got school boards, townships, city councils, and other local offices that pop up too. Many of those races are shaped by low turnout elections that most people barely even give notice to. So if citizens only vote when the race is loud and national and dramatic, and they miss many of the places where government is actually formed. So why do primaries matter so much? Well, it's because they shape the choices that voters will see later. They influence the direction of political parties. They can decide winners in one-party districts. And then you have lower turnout can give a smaller group of voters greater influence. And because self-government requires citizens to pay attention before the final ballot is already set. That's why primaries can matter. And so the real civic question here is not just who wins in November. The real question is who gets the chance to appear on the ballot in the first place. And that really breaks it down to why primaries happen to matter so much. And, well, that's just another one of those civics questions that I thought was worth asking today. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you hanging around for this one as well. This one's probably not as sexy as some of the other topics that happen to come about, but feel free to share it with those folks that you feel might need a little clarity in some of these processes, and I appreciate your time and your engagement. Take care.